Imagine for a second that your company is literally bleeding cash. You're trapped in a dying economy, and to top it all off, your departments absolutely hate each other. Well, welcome to another explainer where we're going to dive into a fascinating Daiwa Institute of Research report that details one of the most dramatic corporate turnarounds in modern history. We're looking at the near collapse and the incredible resurrection of an automotive titan. So, you might be wondering, how exactly does a dying corporate giant save itself during a lost decade? To truly grasp the sheer scale of this miraculous rescue, we have to time travel back to 1990s Japan. Because you really can't understand the corporate restructuring without understanding the national mood. The macro environment was incredibly volatile, and it was being completely reshaped by economic stagnation and some truly unprecedented crises. I mean, the external environment was just incredibly bleak. Starting in 1990, the infamous real estate and financial bubble bursts. Then jumped to 1995, and Japan faces two immense tragedies: the devastating Hanshin earthquake and then the terrifying sarin gas attack. By 1997, a full-blown financial collapse was underway, which led directly into a total recession and severe deflation by 1998. It was a true VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The old systems that had literally built the country were just failing left and right. But here is the wild paradox that the Daiwa report highlights. How does a society face total financial collapse while simultaneously exporting world-dominating anime and fashion? Because ironically, while the traditional hardware and real estate economies were crashing hard, this decade also saw a massive explosion of Japanese subcultures. We're talking the rise of Gao culture, mega-hit anime like Evangelion, and fashion centers like Shibuya 109 absolutely booming. It brilliantly illustrates this deeply complex society in transition. The old, rigid structures were dying off, but new, highly dynamic ones were bursting right through. And it's right in the middle of this totally turbulent environment that we see a sudden, sharp spike in Japanese media for the term yokogushi. Now, literally, that translates to a horizontal skewer, or in business terms, a cross-functional organization. Companies were finally waking up. They realized their traditional vertical silos were essentially trapping them, and they desperately needed this horizontal skewer to connect isolated departments if they wanted any hope of surviving. Part 1: Internal Disease and Silo Organization. Nowhere was this structural failure more obvious than at Nissan Motors in the late 90s. By 1999, Nissan wasn't just losing a little bit of money, they were sitting on a mind-numbing deficit of 684.3 billion yen. They were hemorrhaging cash, teetering on the very edge of complete collapse, violently losing market share, and honestly, just struggling to keep the lights on. So, what exactly went wrong? Well, the source material diagnoses Nissan with some severe internal diseases. It wasn't just a bad economy. It was the three excesses: massive overcapacity in personnel, in facilities, in just crippling debt. Plus, they were plagued by these incredibly rigid, siloed departments and an over-reliance on traditional Keiretsu networks. Now, if you don't know, think of a Keiretsu as this rigid, old-school network of legacy suppliers that a company feels totally obligated to use, regardless of the cost or the quality. But above all, they suffered from a highly toxic culture where departments simply pointed fingers and blamed each other for the company's failures, instead of actually working together. Part 2: CFT as Strong Medicine. Enter Carlos Ghosn in 1999. He looked at this mess and firmly believed that, despite the terrible macro environment of 1990s Japan, Nissan's salvation lay entirely within its own walls. The cure was internal. It specifically required tearing down those massive departmental silos that were just choking the company's potential. I mean, think about your own workplace for a second. When things go wrong, do you blame the market, or do you look inward? To actually achieve this internal cure, he introduced some radical shock therapy. He deliberately bypassed the old executives and handpicked middle managers, specifically those aged 43 to 52. Why? Because they were young enough to actually want real change, but senior enough to know how the company actually functioned. These 9 leaders acted as pilots for 9 specialized cross-functional teams, or CFTs. These teams were basically horizontally skewed across the whole business, covering vital areas from purchasing and manufacturing all the way over to R&D and general management. These 9 leaders acted as pilots for 9 specialized cross-functional teams, or CFTs. These teams were basically horizontally skewed across the whole business, covering vital areas from purchasing and manufacturing all the way over to R&D and general management. And listen, these were not your standard, boring corporate committees. They were designed as potent medicine to kill that old guard mentality, and they operated under incredibly strict rules. First, no taboos or sacred cows allowed, period. Anything was on the table. Second, and I find this absolutely wild, members had to sign actual non-disclosure agreements to keep their discussions secret from their own direct bosses. Imagine having to do that in your office today. And finally, selection for these teams was entirely top-down to prevent departments from trying to hide or protect their best talent. And when it came time to actually present their restructuring ideas, Goins demanded a strict rule of three for their proposals. Number one, clear action goals. Number two, a strict 3-year timeline for implementation. And number three, mathematically quantifiable potential. It was just ruthlessly pragmatic, totally focused on execution. Honestly, it's a brilliant framework you could steal for your own team meetings right now. Part 3. V-shaped recovery without taboos. So, what did this ruthless execution actually look like in practice? Well, the ideas generated by these cross-functional teams were directly forged into the historic Nissan Revival Plan, which they announced in October 1999. And this plan mercilessly attacked the old ways of doing things. Take purchasing, for example. They slashed their 1,145 domestic suppliers down to under 600. They completely shattered decades of Japanese business tradition by dismantling the old Keiretsu system in favor of global, competitive bidding. This single move triggered massive consolidation in related industries all across Japan, like steel manufacturing. Now, the surgery was painful, but it was deemed absolutely necessary for survival. The plan mandated the closure of 5 factories, and that included the historic Moriyama plant, which used to be this proud symbol of Nissan's engineering prowess. Alongside that, they executed a 14% reduction of their total workforce, resulting in the loss of about 21,000 jobs. But here's the thing, the strong medicine worked. It worked brilliantly. By the year 2000, Nissan went from a staggering, near-fatal deficit to achieving a record profit of 331 billion yen. They hit their revival targets a full year ahead of schedule, completing one of the most famous V-shaped recoveries in business history. Part 4. The path to internal internationalization. To make sure this wasn't just some temporary band-aid, Nissan knew they had to permanently embed this cross-functional DNA into their actual corporate structure. So they established the Global Nissan, or GNX structure. They built this revolutionary 3D matrix organization. Basically, instead of just reporting vertically to your head of sales, a manager was now locked into a grid, answering simultaneously to their specific function, their geographic region, and their product line. It became this inescapable web of collaboration that deeply embedded what the report calls internal internationalization. And this internationalization extended straight down to the actual cars rolling off the assembly line. Chief designer Shiro Nakamura was brought in to unify global design efforts that had previously been totally scattered and isolated. By leveraging these cross-cultural and cross-functional inputs, Nissan reclaimed its product power. This resulted in massive, totally distinct global hits like the Qashqai and the Juke, which really drove their European revival. And why does all this matter? Because breaking silos ultimately results in better products that consumers actually want to buy, which is kind of the whole point of a business, right? Nissan's 1990s rescue is just such a powerful reminder. It proves that external crises, even massive ones like Japan's lost decade, are often totally secondary to internal dysfunction. The disease is almost always inside, and the cure usually is too. So take a hard look at your own organization today. Are you just waiting around for the market to save you, or do you have the courage to administer your own cross-functional shock therapy?